Alright everyone, today I want to talk about a subject that is very sciencey. I'm going to be blunt and right up front with you. This is going to be a very sciencey episode, or video. I want to talk about nitrogen fixation. I know that sounds all crazy and, sciencey, but it's real. It's a real thing. Or is it a real thing? Because when I started doing research on this subject, I have found people that will say it's a myth, and people that say it's science and it's a fact. I know it's real. So what I wanted to do is kind of talk about the history of nitrogen fixation and how it's actually used today, or how it can be used today with companion planting. So having said that, let's go talk about it. Okay guys, before we get into the video, I want to invite everyone to subscribe to the channel. Hit the subscribe button, which is right down here. Also, if y'all are inclined and you like Facebook and Instagram, I do have a channel dedicated to down home backyard gardening on both of those websites. The links are right here down below. Check them out. Please give me a thumbs up, share the video, comment on the videos. I enjoy talking to everybody and I try to respond to every single comment. Now, let's get into this video. Okay, so right off the bat, I really got into the idea of this topic when I read this book. Now, you all know that I did a video series on my review of Brian Lowe's book. And you all know Brian Lowe is the creator of Next Level Gardening here on YouTube, one of the biggest gardening channels. He gave me permission to review his book, so I reviewed his book based on my experience as a beginner gardener here in my backyard. I really like the idea of the history behind nitrogen fixation, but what exactly is it? So let's go ahead and recap it real quick. And I love the way that he explains it. Page 66, I'm going to read exactly what he says about nitrogen fixation, and then we'll move on from there. He's talking about cover crops. He said his favorites are the legume family. They can absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere and through their roots transfer it directly into the soil. So basically when the plants are cut down, they will leave those nitrogen stores in their roots for other plants to use. That is a process called nitrogen fixation. So an example of what a root system would look like that has a bunch of nitrogen nodules in the root system is right here. Now, as you can see in this picture, the roots are covered in those little nodules. Well, that's all nitrogen that the plant pulled from the air and put it into the ground. Now, what's awesome about that and why you want to use a legume as a companion plant is this reason right here, because plants need nitrogen. In fact, if you go and get fertilizer or anything of that nature, you're always going to have those three numbers. It's called the NPK, and the N is the nitrogen. That first number is nitrogen. Nitrogen helps the roots grow and stretch and make that plant a stronger plant. So you need nitrogen. But why go buy it if you can grow it as a companion plant? And again, I've been very intrigued by this concept, and I even started doing this myself about a month and a half ago. And let me show you what I'm doing. Okay, so I don't just use beans as a way of growing beans. I have been using beans for the reason and the sole purpose of nitrogen fixation. And let me show you. So right here in this bed, I've got that terrible, terrible peppermint right there. If y'all follow my channel, you know why I hate this plant right here. But in this bed, this is a bean. I am not growing this for any reason other than wanting nitrogen to be down in that soil. The purpose for that is when I pull that bean out, let me correct that. When I cut the bean and leave the root system in, there will be nitrogen in the soil already for my next crops. Okay, also right beside it, I have a guava tree right here. And as you can see, I have two beans growing in that pot with the guava. The sole purpose is to put nitrogen into that pot for fertilizer. Now, why is it important, very important, to put extra fertilizer or nitrogen into a potted plant? Well, well, as you all know if you follow this channel or any of the other gardening channels, and when we talk about container plants or container gardening, remember the only nutrients those plants can get in a container are what you introduce to it or what you give to it. So for me, I've started putting beans in pots just strictly for the nitrogen. Okay, this bed right here is where I had all the zucchini and squash in the beginning of spring or the beginning of summer. And I have planted all these beans throughout this bed strictly for the nitrogen fixation. So when I plant the next crop, which I've already done, and as you can see right there, that is a butternut squash that is growing. And it will benefit from the beans being in this bed already because there are nitrogen stores in the bed, in the soil. Okay, this will be the last example that I show, but right here behind me is a peppermint plant, is a pepper plant that I started doing the experiment of the cutting or the topping of the peppermint back in February. Now, this plant got hit with aphids and something called scale. I'd never even heard of that until like last week. And it's been pretty much decimated. But because this was a 2-year-old pepper plant, I wanted to put beans in the pepper plant with it. Okay, so as you can see, there's a bean growing in here with this pepper plant. Again, strictly for the nitrogen fixation concept of helping this plant with its own natural fertilizer. Okay, y'all, so I just showed you examples of what I'm doing in my garden right now to utilize this concept of nitrogen fixation. But more importantly, it's a great concept of companion planting, which I am absolutely in love with the concept of this. And if this is your all's first time watching my channel, I'm a big proponent of companion planting because what you don't want to do is do what's called monocropping. You don't want to have just one vegetable or one crop in your garden. All that is a bat signal to the pests that attack that specific crop. So you want to do what's called polycropping. You want to mix a bunch of different plants together. But more importantly, you want to use plants that help each other. Whether it's like this, beans or anything from the legume family that helps put nitrogen into the soil, or you're planting a plant that brings in natural predators of pests that attack different plants. You want to polycrop. You do not want to monocrop. And I know this is all sciencey and all that, but it's important. And as a beginner gardener, I had to learn all this. And if you're watching this channel, more than likely, unless you just like my voice or this awesome face, I am just kidding. You're probably a beginner gardener watching this channel, or a seasoned gardener looking for a goofy guy who's showing failures and successes. I don't know. Whatever your purpose is for watching my channel, I thank you. I don't need to know why. Just keep watching and sharing. Before I finish this video, I want to kind of talk a little bit about the history of nitrogen fixation, or more importantly, the history of companion planting, which is part of nitrogen fixation. But of course, back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago, the Native Americans didn't have a clue what nitrogen was or nitrogen fixation. But what they did know is that if they planted certain crops next to other crops, they benefited each other, and all those crops grew really well. That is called, or it's historically known as, the Three Sisters method. Now, again, in Brian's book, on page 13, he talks about this. And to me, I'm a big history nerd. I love history. And when he put this in here, it just really spoke to me. And let's be real. If it worked for the Native Americans hundreds and hundreds of years ago, why can't it work today? But let me explain what the Three Sisters method is for those who don't know. Again, page 13 of his book. The Three Sisters method, which is based on the three crops Native Americans relied on the most: grain, corn, beans, and squash. Okay? So, not to keep reading it, but let me just explain it. The corn, kind of like this okra right here behind me, grow really strong stalks and really tall. Right? Well, beans need a trellis system, or at least climbing beans need a trellis system. So they would plant, the Native Americans would plant beans next to or in between the corn stalks. That way the beans can grow up the corn. Makes sense. I totally get it. Well, then they'd also plant squash, because the squash, as you all know, they get really big leaves. And the leaves would help block out the sun, which will keep the soil moist. Well, all of this is going on. Remember, they're growing beans. So the beans are also pulling nitrogen out of the air and putting that fertilizer into the ground for the squash roots to grow on and utilize, and for the corn to utilize. So those three crops all together mutually benefited each other. And in doing so, it helped the Native Americans with their food source. So we all know the story of the Pilgrims. They put the fish at the bottom of the corn for the Pilgrims, and then they were able to eat. Well, it's the same concept, because fish, when they break down, is basically pure nitrogen. And if you get like a fertilizer like fish emulsion, that's what it is. It's fish that have been ground up in some nasty way and turned into a liquid. But it's a great source of nitrogen. So if you can plant a bean to help put nitrogen in the soil, well then why not do it? It's benefiting not only the soil, but hey, you might get beans from it. So hey, it's a win-win, right? All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. It was kind of a quick crash course on nitrogen fixation / companion planting, but it's a video that, I'm going to be honest, has really spoke to my heart. I've been honestly trying to put this video together for about 2 weeks. I've had so many thoughts and ideas on just what to say and how to present this video, because it's not a typical fun video. I'm not harvesting something in the garden or showing what is or isn't working. We're talking science. We're talking like literally the science of gardening. And that's not the most fun or exciting type of topic, but if you're a serious gardener or a beginner gardener who's very serious about learning all you can about gardening, companion planting and nitrogen fixation go hand in hand, hand in glove. It's something you have to learn, and especially if you want to garden organically, not using all the chemicals and miracle grow stuff and all that, but gardening organically. Companion planting is huge, and for me, it's the only way I'll plant ever again. I'll never do anything else. And you know what? I'll give an example right here, and I wasn't even planning on this. But if you look right here, this is a basil plant. This basil is in between all these tomato plants. Now the reason for that is the basil puts off a smell that confuses and hides the smell of the tomato plant from the moth that lays the tomato hornworms. So just right there alone is a reason why you plant basil next to tomatoes. Companion planting. And hey, you've got basil, right? Now, another thing is if you let the basil go to flower, it brings in bees, which will then help pollinate everything, which I think I have bees behind me. So again, don't want to beat a dead horse here, but companion planting is important. And I'm telling y'all right now, if you want to learn about companion planting in an incredibly easy to read, great example book, go get his book. 100%. This book is great. I'll put a link to the video series right here of all the videos that I did on this book, because there's so much knowledge in here, and in 4 videos I couldn't even cover everything, but I covered everything that was important from what my experience has been, and I was told that he liked it, so he liked the video, so that made me happy. I wanted to do him justice because this book is great. It really helps me, so I'm done. Look at that beautiful okra flower. My goodness. And there's another one right there. So pretty. Nature is amazing. All right, everyone, so that's the video. If you enjoyed it, do me a favor, share the video, like the video, check me out on Facebook and Instagram, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. I know I already covered this at the beginning of the video, but I thought I'd say it again. Hey, and as always, everybody, shine bright and harvest hard. Bye. Oh, man. is already hot, hot, hot. All right, everyone. Example of what a root system would look like that has a bunch of nitrogen, what do you call them? Capsules? No, nodules. Or any of the other gardening channels, and they talk about, and when we talk about, and when we talk about, my gosh, okay, here we go. And when we talk about container plant, just strictly for the nitrogen. Man, this bumblebee just will not leave me alone. Dude, you gotta go, man. Go pollinate. Agree. Okay, here's another example of companion planting as we end this video. You can see right here, all of these flowers are from the peppermint that I cannot get out of this garden. But if you notice, these flowers are leaning out across a bunch of, I got eggplants, right? I mean, look at all these bees in here. Good Lord, this is crazy. If you look, these flowers are hanging out over eggplants and jalapenos. And I've got other peppers over here. All of these plants are being pollinated by this pepper plant. I'm sorry, by this peppermint plant. So that's companion planting 101 right there. Plant stuff next to stuff that will bring in other stuff. Plant vegetables next to other vegetables that will also benefit when pollinators come in, or beneficial insects come in